to today's event on bridging the digital divide and creating access in New York, which we're holding this week to mark the Juneteenth holiday that's coming up in a few days. I'm John Lentz, Editorial Director at City and State, which is partnering with Spectrum on this program. This is the latest in a partnership that has highlighted the diversity of New York's many different communities and reflects City and State's commitment to diversity. Today, we'll hear from a handful of New York's most important leaders about increasing access and connectivity. But first, I'd like to thank our partner, Charter Spectrum, and I'll now turn it over to Camille Joseph Goldman, Group Vice President of Government Relations at Charter Communications.
Thank you, John. Yes, I'm Camille Joseph Goldman, Group Vice President of Government Affairs here at Charter Communications. Many of you know it as Spectrum. As a senior executive here at Spectrum, leading a team throughout the Northeast from Bangor, Maine to Brooklyn, New York, a key part of my responsibilities is to maintain a genuine standard of cultural competency through our leadership and our civic engagement. I'm able to not only assist with elevating key constituency groups in a manner that helps both our company and our customers, but I'm truly lucky to be a part of a company that understands why this is so important. Today's discussions and forums have as their backdrop the celebration and focus on Juneteenth. It became a federal holiday in New York State and a New York State holiday in 2021, and it is the first new federal holiday established since Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday was approved in 1983. Much has been written about the day and over the past few weeks leading up to this year's holiday. However, Juneteenth is as much a celebration of freedom as it is a reminder of the importance of equity and equality. At a time where the growth of technology is at its apex, it is almost inconceivable that anyone would not have access to the very technology that runs our everyday lives, and essentially is how we communicate today. As a leading provider of TV, internet, and phone services, in an area just as unique as New York State, Spectrum is committed to leveraging its full diversity of both the company and its people and partners to make a meaningful difference for our customers and the communities we serve, while continuing our efforts to expand broadband access throughout the state. Last year alone, Charter made over $700 million in capital investments and extended our network to reach an additional 88,000 homes and businesses. From an affordability lens, Spectrum offers several programs and initiatives, has partnered with the federal government on ACP, and has created a slew of programs in New York State to accommodate not only our customers, but the businesses we partner with in almost every corner of the state of New York. Most recently, we announced the expansion of the Big Apple Connect program, which provides free internet and cable TV for more than 300,000 people who live in New York City, participating through NYCHA. As a company on a personal level, it's our goal to support programs and initiatives that bring essential technology resources to those in need, and our top priority remains our commitment to bridging the digital divide. The incredible and accomplished individuals that we have brought together today to address this importance have worked as well and invested in the import of this mission. And they're fighting every day to ensure that equity and equality is understood throughout the state of New York. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and I hope you enjoy all the guests that we've brought together. And speaking of advocates and trailblazers, our first speaker today is a dedicated leader who has worked tirelessly to promote inclusive economic growth and advancement of people throughout New York State. As the CEO and president of the Empire State Development, Hope Knight remains a dedicated and invested partner as you think through equal and fair opportunities for all New Yorkers. She has been instrumental in everything from the creation of the state's Office of Strategic Workforce Development to the revitalization and economic growth of many communities and areas across the state. Prior to her appointment by the governor, Commissioner Knight served as president and CEO of the Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, commissioner of the New York City Planning Commission, and chief operating officer for the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. Needless to say, Commissioner Knight's leadership has been a constant and steady presence as she continues to advocate and fight for equality and equity for all New Yorkers. It is my honor to introduce her today as our keynote speaker. With that said, thank you, Commissioner Knight.
Thank you, Camille, for that gracious introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I also want to thank City and State and Spectrum for hosting today's event. And I'd like to recognize some of my partners in state government, Rory Christian, my colleague from the Department of Public Service, Senator Kevin Parker, Chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, and Assembly Member Alicia Hyman from the Committee on Economic Development, Job Creation, Commerce, and Industry. So it's fitting that we're talking about broadband at this Juneteenth celebration. Fundamentally, both are about expanding opportunity. And frankly, opportunity is the reason why I'm here before you today. It's appointed by New York's first female governor to be the first African American to lead at ESD. And expanding opportunity is at the core of what we do at Empire State Development. From programs that support minority and women-owned businesses to focus on workforce development to assisting small businesses, Governor Hochul and her administration are committed to expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. But having opportunity is useless if you can't access it. Internet connectivity remains one of the biggest challenges of our generation. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed how inaccessible and how unreliable a broadband connection was for many New Yorkers. Suddenly, we were forced to live our lives through the internet, and too many New Yorkers didn't have that option or couldn't afford it. Even as we continue to navigate the post-pandemic landscape, we know that closing the digital divide is critical to unlocking economic growth and reducing inequalities in our society. By connecting families to high-speed internet, we are connecting them to jobs, opportunities, and services. Governor Kathy Hochul understands the urgency and is committed to ensuring all New Yorkers have access to reliable and affordable broadband service. Last year, the governor launched the historic Connect All initiative. This is the largest ever investment in New York's digital infrastructure and more than $1 billion in new public investments. Connect All will provide affordable access to New Yorkers in rural and urban areas and continue New York State's leadership in connectivity. A pillar of Governor Hochul's initiative is ensuring equitable access to broadband statewide. Digital equity also means that everyone should have the skills and resources to benefit from the digital economy. Our investments in this area will include growing digital literacy programs and computer access so that everyone has opportunity to use the internet. Last year, Governor Hochul launched a multi-agency initiative to build awareness of the federal Affordable Connectivity Program. The program provides discounts for low-income households, and New Yorkers responded, and more than 1 million qualifying New York households enrolled in the program. That represents 30% of eligible households, collecting more than $360 million in federal support. That's a game changer for 1 million households. We're also engaging and collaborating with a diverse range of stakeholders across the state. In March, we launched a series of internet and digital equity listening sessions in each of the state's 10 regions. The last of those will be held here in New York City later today at the Harlem School of the Arts, and you can go and live stream the meeting at broadband.ny.gov. The Connect All team partnered with the local digital inclusion advocates to hear from those working close to the digital divide. Each event focused on barriers to internet access and resources and opportunities available to help address those barriers. These sessions were about the human side of digital infrastructure by considering things like affordability and digital literacy, and how historically marginalized communities can improve their online lives. Following these sessions, in conjunction with our other data collection efforts, the Connect All team will lead the development of New York's first ever statewide digital equity program. This will be done in collaboration with other state and local agencies, plus private and not-for-profit organizations, and many New York residents. It will be submitted to the federal government before the end of the year and will help secure federal funding to establish a digital equity grant program. The plan will serve as a guiding framework for all of the Connect All programs, including grants related to affordable housing and public infrastructure, and it will consider factors like quality of service, affordability goals, and digital skills acquisition. It will be grounded in the input we've received from historically marginalized communities, bringing their concerns to the forefront. Digital equity is leading the discussions and guiding our efforts rather than supplementing. Investing in our broadband connectivity is investing in economic development. It's investing in our future because connectivity means opportunity. Digital equity is just one way that we continue to expand opportunity under the governor's leadership. And today we can close the digital divide, grow our digital infrastructure, and support digital equity for all New Yorkers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today and enjoy the rest of this session.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Knight. And I think you're absolutely correct. Equity does lead to opportunity. And we're so grateful for your work and your focus. And thank you so much for sharing such an inspiring keynote today.
Thank you again.
And with that said, I'd like to introduce Senator Kevin Parker, leader from Brooklyn, staunch advocate for all New Yorkers, chair of technology and energy in the state Senate, but has been a leader true and true in fighting for not only his district, but vulnerable communities throughout the state of New York for some time as an elder statesman here in the state legislature. Let's welcome Kevin Parker. Hello, Senator Parker, how are you? I think we're having some issues hearing you, leader. And I think while Senator Parker works on his, I think he works on his audio, I also want to see if we have our PSC chair, Rory Christian, with us today. If not, that is not an issue. We'll get started with Senator Parker once he bridges his own technological divide and gets his sound to work. Oh no, we still can't hear you, sir. And while he works on that, let me just remind everyone about the candor of today's conversation. I think on the heels of understanding that Juneteenth is a new holiday, not just for the nation, but for New York State, as well as thinking through the needs of Black Americans in the state of New York, now more than ever, thinking through the imports of technology and bridging the digital divide, but also reflecting on the many leaders who are at the table actively having the discussions, for the first time reflecting the very demographic that perhaps is most impacted. Kevin Parker joins the ranks of leaders here in the state, prominent Black leaders who are fighting tirelessly to think through these issues and initiatives and come to solutions for all New Yorkers in a way that makes companies like Charter Communications and so many others able to come to the table and think through the best partnerships. Oh no. What's interesting is that this is, if you've ever gone to an event with Senator Parker, I think this is the least he's ever spoken. So you know he must have an issue with his device. We'll give him just one more minute. Oh, no. Assemblywoman Hyman, feel free to jump in.
I was laughing because that is probably the least amount of speaking he's ever done. And so my colleague, as a senior statesman for New York State Senate, the work that he's done in economic development, and especially he's chair of a committee that deals with forward-thinking technologies, broadband, electric vehicles, and he's done tremendous work in that area. So I was really proud that he co-sponsored the bill in the Senate of Juneteenth for New York State in 2021. It was historic. Many of us had celebrated Juneteenth in New York State for years, but at the death of George Floyd, it seemed like the most appropriate time to enter the bill. We did, it passed in New York State, and now it's celebrated around the country. And this is, to me, although people have some have said this is about celebration, it should be. There is no holiday in this country that celebrates the freedom of enslaved peoples. So I think I really want to thank Spectrum and Charter Communications for recognizing it today and doing the work to bridge the digital divide throughout the city and state. The work that you're doing with NYCHA is tremendous. We want to make sure that continues. Obviously, everyone does not live in NYCHA. You know, I found as a single mom that if there were certain bills that I wouldn't pay, it was automatically the cable bill. A lot of middle class families do not have that option. Your kids come home from school or college, they need the Wi-Fi to make sure they can access the internet. So it is most appropriate that Spectrum and Charter, City and State are doing this today, because we get most of our information from our smartphones. That's what we use. And not having Wi-Fi, you can see people walking around in the woods or dead zones. We need to be connected at all times. So sorry to fill in for you, Senator Parker. I hope you can jump in.
While I have you, Assemblywoman, is this Senator Parker, can we hear you now?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Okay, goodness,
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, we will get back to Assemblywoman. And actually, if you want to stay, we can pivot, because I think it'd be great to have a conversation with the both of you, honestly. And if City and State's okay with me calling an audible, perhaps you can facilitate a conversation. I think it's something that you said earlier, Assemblywoman, and I know that Senator Parker's gonna have a lot to say about it, is the fact that you brought to the forefront the importance of this bill for the state of New York, right? And I don't want to just kind of slide over that, because it's true. There is no other holiday that celebrates the import of freedom in this way. And when you think of freedom, you think of equity, and you think of opportunity. So I wanted to give you both an opportunity to kind of reflect on and share with all of us, what does Juneteenth mean to both of you through your personal lens and the work that you do in your districts?
Assemblywoman, you can go first.
To me, Juneteenth was a holiday that we celebrated informally. We have celebrations, we had events, we had history that I think if you are, for most people of African descent, have some inkling of what Juneteenth is. The freeing of the formerly enslaved in 1865, after slavery was abolished in the Confederate States in 1863. And I think not knowing our history, not being taught in schools, most public schools, a lot of us were fortunate going to college, becoming a Black Studies major myself, was my real introduction to Juneteenth. Having celebrations on June 19th every year was my connection to my ancestry, and being able to introduce this bill with Senator Parker. It is the culmination of work that have been done by our predecessors for years, and making this, looking at that bill in my office, signed into law in 2021, really, in my personal journey, especially in this legislative session and every session, this is one piece of legislation that cannot be taken away from us, because it's in the books for all people in New York State, and not just for our history, for other people to learn our history also, and that it's American history, and that America wouldn't be the America we know if it wasn't for the inclusion of the formerly enslaved and African Americans in this country.
I couldn't agree more. Before we segue to Senator Parker, one thing I want to say, which is really so inspiring for me, is because if you can see it, you can be it. And when we have leaders like the Assemblywoman at the table, when we have leaders like Senator Parker at the table, it's why these measures can be enacted. And so thank you for being our voice and the voice for so many, because it is American history. And with that, Senator Parker.
Camille, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks Spectrum for putting this together and acknowledging this important holiday. Again, as you know, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I represent the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Flatlands, Mill Basin, Marine Park, and Bergen Beach. And I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, as well as the majority whip in the New York State Senate. And I really want to just begin by thanking Alicia Hyman, who was really the sharp end of the sword on this particular legislation and making sure it becomes law. And what people don't have an appreciation for, that I think the Assemblywoman was trying to lean towards, is how hard it is to actually change the law in the state of New York. It's incredibly hard, right? And Alicia makes it look easier than it really is, because she does it with a lot of grace and but there's a lot of hard work that goes behind that as well. And certainly getting a holiday is really difficult thing. And we did this a year prior to the federal government making it a federal holiday. So even if the federal holiday for some reason went away, we still have a state holiday in which we're recognizing the day and this important milestones. Again, like Assemblymember Hyman, I'm actually I have a minor in Black Studies from Penn State. Actually, I'm a Black Studies professor at CUNY and SUNY for the last pretty much 30 years. And so personally, this is a big deal because again, being African American, my family's from South Carolina. I'm sorry, from North Carolina and from Virginia originally. There's a lot of personal reflection about what my personal ancestors have gone through, but also having gone to a predominantly white institution, growing up really in a white community of Flatbush. When I moved, now people think of Flatbush as the center of the Caribbean community, but when I moved there, 40 something years ago, almost 50 years ago, it was predominantly a white community. In fact, I was the second Black family in my block, and so the fact that we have the entire state and the entire nation stopping and pausing to acknowledge first the wrong that was done to us, and then celebrating the fact that we as a nation move past that movement to give freedom to African people, freedom that they really were God-given and was denied to them, by white supremacy, was restored through a lot of hard work, is I think really important for me personally, to have people pause to acknowledge that, right? And then as a legislator and a professor, I think that it gives us the moment to both atone as a nation, right, and for us to know our history, as a community, right? Like we really should be using this as a time to think about the place in which we've come from, right? There's a proverb that says, "How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been?" Right? And if you don't know where you've been and you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, right? And so it's important for us to embrace what in Ghana, West Africa, in the Akan language, Twi, they say Sankofa, which means literally to go fetch. But the notion is to go back and return to your source, so you understand who you are. And I think that this is a saying that this holiday every year gives us a Sankofa moment, both to go back to who we are as African people and understand our culture, but then also to understand the history of enslavement and oppression that African people have gone through and what that has meant. And so when we see an Alicia Hyman or a Camille Joseph Goldman and the heights that they have reached, right? And think about that that the enslavement that our ancestors, right, whether it was here or the Caribbean, were enslaved, less than 150 years ago, right? Like it's amazing to have made this much progress in this amount of time. And that becomes the basis and understanding about how we move forward and how we do more for our communities.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things we tried to highlight with this forum was identifying one issue, right, Senator, that could still be an impediment for progression for people of color, and that's their access, right? And that's thinking about the digital divide. And I wanted to hear more from you, as well as the Assemblywoman, around kind of measures that you've seen, whether it's in your district or through your colleagues across the state, that you think have greatly benefited the discussions around improving this, and what you'd like to see more of. One thing you mentioned, Assemblywoman, is that not everyone lives in NYCHA, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are folks in varying levels of income and households who are grappling with the current economic conditions that are seemingly out of all of our hands. I know that here at Charter Spectrum, we partnered the federal government through the Affordable Connectivity Program to help folks in low-income households, and we thought through a slew of other programs. But I have to tell you this, right? Even being on the ground in NYCHA, for example, and going with teams and knocking on doors to sign folks up, there's still even a hesitance when the opportunity presents itself. And thinking through ways in which we can partner and raise awareness, not just about what's out there, but what's also we still need to do, I think is also important. I know that you both see that firsthand with the constituents that you serve daily, as well as through the lens of your colleagues throughout the state of New York. Assemblywoman, you know this. You can speak to Pam Hunter, who has both like a rural and urban area in upstate New York. Senator Parker, many of your colleagues represent folks of color in rural areas in upstate New York. This is both an urban and rural narrative that both of you have tried to address, and we want to hear more about what you see as far as the accomplishments to date, as well as, to be honest and fair, what still needs to be done.
Well, I'm glad you said that. The state connectivity program for my colleagues who are upstate in Western New York is important, because I think we really, the city electeds really localize our issues, but we are a 62 county state. And my colleagues have expressed that some areas are just no broadband is available. You find children in front of libraries or other areas outside of their houses if they don't have the connectivity. I salute the governor for what she's doing. It just needs to happen, as we all say, on a faster scale. We know that the pandemic really highlighted all of those areas that are without broadband access. And for much of the state moves through the economics of the middle class, who suffered greatly during this pandemic and are often left out. Even with the federal program, you have to have received some kind of benefit in order to receive it. And so my point of, we're talking with colleagues is that, we have utilities that are regulated, and I know that it's not a popular conversation, but we really have to talk about how does the middle class, who are not eligible for these discounts, how do we make sure that we are sustaining them? As I said, sometimes if there's a bill that you have to pay upstate, Western New York, you have to pay for gas to get around. Buses are difficult. If you have a choice between your cell phone bill or your broadband wireless cable bill, sometimes you're going to make the decision. And I don't think anyone should have to make that decision. I happen to represent Southeast Queens, predominantly middle class community, but we have a lot of people who did a lot of overtime in their jobs. Overtime was lost during the pandemic for some people. And, hard decisions have to be made. It's not easy, but for my colleagues and I, it's really important that you understand that when we're in Albany, we legislate for the entire state of New York. And these conversations are necessary and important to have. Obviously, not just, in Juneteenth, I'm happy we're having it, but every month we need to be talking about how we make sure that with this technology and the infrastructure that we have, which I know Senator Parker knows a lot about. He's really an expert. And when people reach out to me from other states, I send them right to him, that we really need to do a better job of making sure that New York is an example of how we make sure the interconnectedness of broadband, Wi-Fi, table, as we still call it, everyone on every income level has access, affordable access.
Yeah, Camille. Again, as the chair of the Energy and Telecom Committee, you and I talk about this kind of constantly. This issue of digital equity is the next digital divide, right? We talk about the digital divide. Initially, the digital divide was a hardware issue, and now it's become access to high-speed broadband. And it really is as important as any other utility that people, in their house, right? And so, in the same way that from a housing perspective, we would never put anybody in a house without gas, water, and electric. We now need to be thinking about high-speed broadband in that same dynamic. And just to give you a contradiction of how this played itself out during the pandemic, when the vaccine became available, the first group of people that we actually allowed to get access to the vaccine were senior citizens. But the only way that they could actually sign up to get it was actually online, which was like it was just like the crazy, like, it was just like the craziest ironic thing. It's like the people who have the lowest usage rate of digital access and digital usage, you're going to use them. You're going to use this mean as the only means that they can to get it. It was absolutely bizarre, but it's the kind of thing that we're dealing with daily on all kinds of issues, right? And so this issue of digital equity has been at the top of my agenda, for 4 or 5 years. I do want to just congratulate and thank Charter Spectrum for the work they've done in this area in the state of New York. Every time I've called, and I'm not just saying this, for you, but every time I've called, honestly, you folks have stepped up, and not just in NYCHA, but also in homeless shelters and in your service area. To provide free high-speed broadband to some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, which are, women who are survivors of DV oftentimes, and their children. And so, that kind of work has to continue to happen. But generally, we're dealing with two separate problems, right? And both of you spoke to them. The first is a build-out problem. And so we have places both in urban areas and rural areas where we have a build out problem, where it's just simply not available because we have not built out the infrastructure. We're hoping that some of the federal money that's come through recently will help address a large portion of that. We have, in the context of that, we have something called the last mile problems. People who live in the city don't understand that because we all think that everybody lives like upstairs or downstairs, but in parts of this state, your next neighbor could be 5 miles away. And then how do you build out reliable, affordable access to high-speed broadband in those circumstances? And that's part of the challenge that we're addressing. The other issue outside of build out is affordability and adoption. And most of the adoption issues have to do with affordability. We've done some stuff in terms of having a low-cost plan here. We did that in the budget about 3 years ago. And we initially, I think, put it at $15, and then the courts came and changed it to a $30 plan. But it just, again, a plan that provided affordability here for folks in our state. So we have to continue to work on deepening affordability and making sure that we continue to build out both in rural areas and in urban areas where people don't have enough access. Again, the pandemic exacerbated a problem and made it clearer to us about how many people didn't have it, but we continue to have emergencies. We had one this last week, when the air quality went down and they went to virtual learning for a day. But again, does everybody have a tablet? Does everybody have access to high-speed broadband in order to get their lessons and have virtual learning? These are critical issues, and particularly in Black and Latino communities where the children are oftentimes already behind. And so there's a lot of work to be done around digital equity. But I don't think that, frankly, we are the ones who are going to solve all the problems. There's a lot of community-based organizations who are doing a lot of work on this, and but we need to have really a significant partnership. Some of this work is happening, but it needs to be ramped up a little bit between the legislature, between companies like Spectrum that's doing the work, between community-based organizations and community leaders to tell us kind of, specifically how do we address where the problems are in it, and then we need to work together to figure out how we address them and put resources towards dealing with it, because the impact of lack of high speed broadband and this digital divide has implications on health, particularly as we go to telehealth processes. It has implications on education, as we discussed, has implications on safety, and as announcements and stuff are made in that way. There's almost,
it goes on and on. You cannot operate actually without.
That's right. And so it's critically important that we keep an eye on it. This is no longer just about ability to play solitaire on your phone, but this is really so much of our work is being done that way, right? And anybody has problems, including me, trying to make my sound work.
Well, one thing I can say about both of you, and I mean this truly, as someone, I represent several states for charter communications. I will say, given the unique construct of New York State, it's often a reference point for many states. There are very few states that are dealing with such a robust constituency. We have areas in the state that are as rural as the most rural places in Maine, and cities that are bustling just like Boston, Massachusetts, right? Like and as leaders, not only are you thinking through solutions, I think as the Assemblywoman mentioned, for every county in New York State, but both of you, and I've seen it, you guys attend national conferences, you're in close correspondence with other colleagues in other states. The solutions that are developed here, the thought partnership here in New York State often sets a standard nationally for other states either replicate or try to think through as well, which is why your leadership is so important and so impactful for so many. And with that said, if we were to come back a year from now, as my final question for both of you, and we say, what has Juneteenth meant for you throughout the last year? What were you proud to see, given the imports? Because Assemblywoman, you said it's not just a day. We should be living this truth. And while you've anointed the day and made it a holiday, it's really to underscore the import, and that so folks are living through the work and doing the work, right? And so a year from now, for both of you, what are you hoping to say? You know what, since the last Juneteenth, this was done in New York State. I saw this in my community. I saw this in my constituency. I saw the furtherance of this particular goal.
I'm so glad you asked that. My background has been education, and Senator Parker knows this really well, from K to the adults that decide to go back to college. We just had a chief that went and got his law degree in NYPD, I think Chief Madry. So for me, this is not a day off to sleep late. This is a day there are so many Juneteenth celebrations, and I'm a real big fan of Juneteenth in Queens. This will be the third year that we have taken over Roy Wilkins Park. We do a reenactment of what it might have meant to those enslaved Black people at the time of learning of their freedom in Galveston, Texas. We encourage our school district, District 29, under our superintendent, Dr. Bonds, to make sure the children don't stay home, but come to the park, learn about what Juneteenth is. It gives the conversations. Teachers are now having to explain what Juneteenth means. So for me, the educator, is the constant learning, not just for our children, for the parents, the grandparents, who may never have heard of this, who get to celebrate this. And in Queens, this festival has gotten bigger every year. I have to thank my former chief of staff, Tanisha Morrison, my current staff, for making this happen, because Juneteenth to me this is America's day to thank those enslaved and all the progress we've made, despite being lynched, despite having families taken from us, despite redlining, despite racism. We've made it this far. And so for me, it's encouraging and educating the generations after me that this is a day for us and the country to realize and atone, like Senator Parker said, atone for what was done to enslaved Africans and where we are now. So we are celebrating Juneteenth from 12 to 7 in Roy Wilkins Park on Merrick Boulevard. This is the third year. It's free admission. We just ask that you register. Juneteenth in Queens. You can pull it up. And it's gonna be a great day. And I'm doing this every year on Juneteenth because I want to celebrate our culture, our history, and share it with the world. And the best place to do it is in the world's borough.
Oh, is that the Bronx? Where I'm
Queens, Queens, let's not get crazy.
I will say, I did note this event on the, Charter Communications, also the parent company for Spectrum News, and it's on the Spectrum News calendar, was highlighted earlier today. So good luck with the event, and thank you so much for everything. And Senator Parker will give you the final comments for this panel.
Yeah, first of all, again, thank Spectrum for having us, and thank you to my colleague Alicia Hyman, who's a great legislative partner and a great friend. And she's right that the program they do in Juneteenth in Queens is right now the standard for what needs to happen. And for once, Brooklyn needs to catch up a little bit. For once, I'm gonna give you flowers right now. This one time. But
this is
you know,
recorded. This is recorded.
Being filmed.
So to answer your question, what I like to see on Juneteenth next year is more celebrations like we see in Queens in every borough. I like to see every borough kind of almost in competition about how big we can make Juneteenth. And alongside what Assemblymember Hyman indicated, it needs to be a lot more about education, about people learning. I like to see a lot more lectures. Maybe it'd be great to see next year Spectrum host a set of kind of history lectures around the city about the period of enslavement or even the period of Reconstruction and what happened immediately after enslavement. But just to have people kind of at this time delve into the history of African Americans during that period, and so people kind of understand that history as a jumping off point to their studies and their understanding about how we go forward. But I'd like to see essentially three things: us expand the regional participation in events. There'd be a much heavier education component. But third, also us developing specific rituals, even if they're familiar rituals, around this holiday. And again, as the Assembly member said, this should not be a day off, should be a day on, and we should really see it as, in terms of delving into our history, a lot more, even programming on shows and radio and cable or whatever that are talking about our history and during this period, so that people, just like you go into Christmas and then for the 2 weeks prior, everybody's showing Christmas shows. There should be things particularly about that period that in which people can kind of understand what the enslavement of African people meant, what the period after it meant, and how it informs us about who we are today, and more importantly about how we can be moving towards progress for tomorrow.
Well, the only correction I'll make to you, Senator, is I agree there should be a constant cadence, but I don't want to take away from the fact that, especially young leaders, seeing you and seeing the Assemblywoman doing the work that you do is in itself a testament to that progress. So thank you for showing up and showing out and doing the work that you're doing, because that in itself is beyond a ritual. It's a blessing. And so thank you so much for joining this conversation today. Thank you so much. Won't a woman do it? Jumped in and helped us.
I know my brother. I know it happens.
Always holding up the black man.
Always. No problem. He's not heavy. He's my brother. So yeah.
And we appreciate the candor and the words, and we look forward to revisiting this conversation and holding everyone accountable to what you both said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, and we heard a lot today. We heard from Commissioner Knight. We've heard from 2 additional dynamic leaders in the state of New York, Assemblywoman Alicia Hyman and Senator Kevin Parker. But now we're going to pivot to 2 individuals who are actually doing the work that was spoken about throughout today's forum. Joining us today, we have Jodia Vanel. Jodia, I want to get your title correct because it's so important. Jodia serves as the lead for New York State For the Federal Program Officer for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I'm so used to saying NTIA, and you'll find that in telecom, in this industry, there's so many acronyms. I was like, I gotta get this correct. Showtime. And we also have Tiffany Rhea Fisher, Director of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative. And I want to say this, I think it's important to table set in this way. We heard from Commissioner Knights that equity should lead to opportunity. We heard from the Assemblywoman that, you know, Juneteenth is important because it's an important reminder of where we've come and where we need to go. And she listed bridging the digital divide as one of those things that we have to think through moving forward. And then you heard the Senator, Kevin Parker, talk through and think through what it's meant both in his district and what he's seen throughout the state. And to help everyone kind of familiarize themselves with the work, the very important work that the both of you are doing, can you tell us a bit about your mission and the communities that you're currently serving in your roles? And then we'll roll into some of the questions.
Absolutely.
Start with you, Jody, and then we'll pivot over to Tiffany, if that's okay.
Okay, well, hi, Camille. No worries. I struggle with my own title sometimes too. It is the longest name possible, so we just go by NTIA. But thank you so much to City and State and Charter Communications for bringing us together today in talking about Juneteenth, but also connecting it to the issues that we face with connectivity. So I thought it's a brilliant way to bring together and understand like what those past challenges are and what we currently face today. I am Jodia Vanell. I am the Federal Program Officer assigned to the state of New York. What does that really mean? So not too long ago, the Congress and Senate passed the bipartisan act, the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. And part of that became how do we build out critical infrastructure in the United States? As we know, through the pandemic, there are major struggles that everyone experienced, whether you were rich, poor, in between, everyone experienced some sort of challenge. So under President Biden and others, we decided that we wanted to connect everyone across the United States and its US territories. Thus born the mission of Internet for All, connecting everyone who are underserved or uncovered. And so with companies like Charter and many others, we are going to be working together to deploy broadband in the state of New York and every other state out there along with the US territories. What does that mean? This is under or classified under what is called BEAD, that is broadband, equity, access, and deployment. And in addition to that, and it has been mentioned so much here, is the digital equity piece of it, which means that not only are we going to drill and deploy and set up the infrastructure in New York, but we're also going to make sure that people are capable of using devices, are capable of accessing the important services that they need. This is a generational type of like planning. And so we are going to work with everyone from the community all the way to different stakeholders like the internet service providers to bring everyone together and to make sure this happens in the next 5 years. The commissioner mentioned something today, and I will give the plug right after this. Please jump over, if you can, in person or online to the New York City listening session. Why is that critically important for everyone on this call? Because it's all about your voice. So as the federal program officer, we look to the New York State residents to create the plan that is submitted to myself along with my colleagues at NTIA. Eventually, based on the plan that New York is putting together, we review it, we finalize it, we approve it, fingers crossed, by the end of the year. And most importantly, what that ultimately means for New York residents is that we will provide lots of funding for broadband. And that is extremely important for us to build this out Thus, we need your input. So at 3 p.m. today to 7 p.m., log on to the New York City listening session. It is where we're going to collect the data from you, your insights about your challenges and your opportunities using the internet. And then we take all of that information to funnel it into all of our final reports so that New York can get all of the critical funding resources that are needed. And when I say funding resources, I'm talking about billions of dollars. I'm talking about $47 billion that is allocated to the United States and its territories, along with $2.6 billion allocated to digital equity. So I want New York to win, and I want to make sure everyone is part of the solution. Hopefully that answers your question about me.
It does. And one thing, first and foremost, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the investments you're making. You talked about kind of doing the work. And I want to introduce Tiffany because she's on the ground and she's doing and trying to enact some of the very things that you highlighted. And Tiffany, I'll give you the same opportunity. Can you share a bit about the work that you're doing and the communities that you're serving?
Sure. So I actually travel between Harlem and Saranac Lake every other week. So I'm up and back. I'm on the road every weekend. And I am the director of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, which not only covers the Adirondacks, but also the North Country. So a fifth of our state. And that area is going to play a huge part in our state's future moving forward. It has been, but it's going to be even more critically important as we move forward. And so my work is really interesting. I get anything from someone being called a racial slur at school to like police trainings, all comes here. So it's really broad. It's very interesting work. It's sometimes painful work. I think how I've kind of broken it down in my head is that on our end, we want to do a lot. We do a lot of community facing events. We do a lot of community facing projects. We do trainings with the police, with campus police, with state troopers, with detectives, with corrections officers, anything that you can think of, so that there's cultural competency in however DEC rangers. So however you're interacting with that there's understanding. We work with different points of contact. So if you're new to the area, whether that's coming into a new business for a cup of coffee, if you're a new family and you're going into the school systems, if you are hitting one of those speed traps as soon as you enter the Adirondacks, like those trailheads, any of that, we're making sure that we have points of contact, that we are in conversation with those points of contact so that they understand how to receive people that may or may not look like them. And the whole, like how I like to look at my job is making the Adirondacks and the North Country a more welcoming environment for people that look like us, like at the end of the day. And so that includes an emerging stewards program and making sure that Black and Brown people are part of the future of cultivating this land and being the stewards of this land, and micro credentials for businesses. If you can't always get the workforce to look like you, are you ready to receive someone that looks like you? So right, so that's in the smallest of nutshells, kind of the work that's being done. But it really is a joy. I started going up to the Adirondacks 20 years ago as an artist in residence. So everything that I do is also done through an art and culture lens, which I think lends itself for a lot of empathy. Like I really move from that place, and this community is one that I care about deeply and that I want to share, but I want to make sure that it is safe for us to be there. And I want to make sure that it is clear where we stand, that if there's something that feels unsafe, that we are on top of it. But it is a tall order, because like I said, anything from something happening on the playground to major issues with police kind of land right on my desk.
Listen, I think that, first of all, thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the work that both of you are doing. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, so we always say it's a labor of love. It has to be, right. As you're calling. And before I pivot, I have two questions for both of you. But first, I want to start with you, Tiffany, because I want to understand, given the complexity of the needs on the ground and everything you just discussed, how do you see the digital divide playing out? Because you're thinking about your area. And just so you know, as someone from the Bronx, there was a time very early on in my career that upstate New York was Westchester, and much of the North Country had to mean Canada, right? Yeah. And so, this, as I said before, this state is incredibly unique, incredibly diverse. And I think it's important for you to share kind of how you see the digital divide playing out for the communities in the areas that you're so focused on, because it's unique and it's different. I think it's important for folks to understand what you're tackling and what you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's extremely challenging. Upstate is really, really rural. I mean, even for this, I was like, I got to get back to Harlem just so I don't have any problems. You know, it really is. It's extremely challenging.
That saddens me. Because you shouldn't have to leave your area for better quality internet services. So selfishly, I want to talk to you after this.
Yes, yeah, no, I think that we should, because it's something that the Adirondacks. What I want to make sure that what doesn't happen with the Adirondacks is that it doesn't become a playground for the rich. And right now, you can get access there. You absolutely can, but it is difficult because when you live within a national park, the policies are different. Like, you can't just build things you can't just put up towers the way you would other places. So we have really unique problems. I don't think that it's coming from a place of disregard or anything like that. It is, the challenges are very, very different, but it still feels away. It still feels away. And as you're talking about it, it's true. Like, for the pandemic happened upstate too. Those kids had to be online all day too. And it was extremely challenging. And I think before it was just kind of part of the culture, and it was like, oh, it's okay, you can just be out in nature. But as we get more and more connected, it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And on our end, it is solely an economic issue. It's not a race issue. It's not a culture issue. It is solely up there an economic issue. And the divide between people that summer there and come for a moment and have their third and fourth home there to the locals and working class people is extreme. And so it's about, filling in that gap is what's happening and what the work is on our end.
That's understandable. Now I'm going to pivot to Jodia, because these are the very issues. Jodia has been working very hard with the Connect All office here in New York State on a listening tour. And one thing I will say, I know we at Charter dealt with, we were able to assist with service, but one thing as the pandemic hit, you had a lot of even college students, right, who didn't really grapple with the status of broadband in their homes, because they were like, oh, I'm away at school. But when they were home and having to do work, what that meant for the community. And so there's so many different entry points to this narrative and to this conversation. Jody, I'm sure that anecdotally, you have tons of stories now from throughout the state of New York. And I know while it's too early for you to say declaratively what you're going to be doing through your official role, what are some of your initial thoughts based on the stories that you've heard in New York State? And what are some trends that you're observing thus far?
Yeah, so, Tiffany, I commend you for all that you're doing in the Adirondacks. It is for lots of folks that are on this platform right now, it's actually a very difficult place to bring connectivity due to the topography. I will tell you, I was scared to death when I went up there to visit. We drove in the middle of the night, could not figure out what was going on. There was no internet connection. I really thought I was going to drive off of a mountain. So safety for me is number one in bringing connection there, so that people are literally not dying when they're in the mountains. And then all of the other things come along. So those are one of the things I took away from the Adirondacks. But as Camille said, we've been on a listening tour since March, and we're ending our last tour this evening in Harlem, New York. So again, please sign on, please attend. Your input is critically important. We've crisscrossed all across the state to listen. As I mentioned, listening is critically important to us because that is the data in which we use to assess what is the state of New York, what is the state of the states in terms of connectivity. There have been so many different perspectives that are shared from folks that have transportation issues, from folks that are disabled, from the elderly, maybe not so much an accessibility issue, maybe it's more affordability. There's so many different issues that come in from every single area. That's why we've been crisscrossing all across the state. Tonight, I'm eager to hear what is happening in New York City. Do I think it may be an accessibility issue? No, maybe the conversation is more skewed to an affordability issue in New York City. Every listening tour gives us a totally different perspective, and it also allows helps us to hone in on that particular area and those particular folks and their specific needs. So that's why those listening tours have been really important. Camille mentioned, we have a strong partnership. It's the federal government partnering with New York State's Governor, Kathy Hochul, and the Connect All office. You heard from the commissioner today, there is a broadband office that has been established. If you have not visited that site, you should visit that site because there are plenty of opportunities that are going to come from that. So we are working together to build out what the plan is going to look like. Right now, we're in the stages of investigating, of debriefing, of finding information, critical information for us. And then the next stage of that is to go a little bit deeper. We're going into focus groups right now. From the NTIA's perspective, we have not only the plan of connecting all throughout the United States and its territories, but we also have like various pillars in which we're focused on. Workforce development is critically important for us. So we are looking to folks like Charter and all of their competitors and everyone who's in the scope to help to build up New York. So not only are we drilling one time only, but we're creating a sustainable ecosystem for creating jobs, for upskilling, for creating the new generation of folks that are going to be within this particular industry. So there's a lot of research that are going behind the scenes, and we are working with the Connect All office to make sure that they have every resource that's possible to make sure New York is successful and New York ultimately gets that money. There's so much more to take place, but right now the focus has been for the last 3 months is on those listening sessions. We can't move forward unless we hear from you. And we're finishing up the final one tonight or this afternoon at 3 p.m.
I mean, it's really reassuring that from the federal government to the state government, the very issue we're highlighting today is being prioritized in a real way. And as Jody has said, for those who are listening in and who are watching this forum, please go on and do your own due diligence. It's very important that all voices are heard. And before I segue to our final question, it's not lost on me that both of you are doing the work for so many people. But as we said before with the assembly member and the senator, both of you reflect a demographic that historically, both in New York State and nationally, been left behind. And I'm wondering, as one of my final questions to both of you, what that lens and how that candor impacts the work that you're doing, right? How does that drive the mission? Because in many ways, you're in the room, not just because of, but in furtherance of, right? Which is not everyone's cross when they enter a room, right? You don't have many luxuries. And so really think it's important for folks to hear your unique perspective. And we can start with Tiffany on how that both informs the work you do. And if you're and if it's up to you, how perhaps you find it challenging at times. I think the way we're able to uplift and kind of be true and inspire others is through the candor of these conversations.
That's an excellent question, Camille. And I think that I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways, maybe, because there's so much. I mean, there's a lot there. But I feel like one of the things that is important to note that I like to remind people is that our people, like, the period of enslavement is longer than the period of freedom. So that, like, just from that perspective, so we center that, we anchor on that, and now we can move forward. So any room, I have a shirt, it's my favorite shirt that says, "Dear ancestors, I understand the assignment," right? So any room that I walk into, understand it's not just me that's coming into the room, and I feel responsible. And it's hard, right? We don't want to be a talking piece for all people, but I can bring my lineage, daughter of, into the room. And that lived experience, it's sometimes I feel like the lived experience versus a more academic experience can be at odds with each other. They're not. They're equal and they're necessary for both to be in constant communication with each other, and they're valid in their own ways. And so I think for me, in the work that I do and where I come forward, I could be very angry all the time, easily and understandably. But for me, I really center joy as my personal protest, because this was not a space, not this space was, it seems, but this place was not a place that was meant for me to be successful. It's not a place that was meant for me to be joyful. So me centering joy and protecting my peace is my personal protest, because Black pain and Black failure is a narrative that's accepted, but Black celebration and Black joy is not. So that's like, I'm coming with all of the good, amazing things that's happening and talking about Juneteenth. It is a celebration, right? And that's really, really important. But I do think that very first point gets missed on people, is that we're not even at a plateau. We're not even equal parts at this point in our history and equal parts here. I can go on forever. However, I think that's really important for people to acknowledge. So the body that I'm in, I love this body that I'm in. I love representing others within that and bringing them into every room that I come into, because it's necessary. Because of the history of this country as it relates to people that look like this, we are behind in certain aspects. So the fact that we've caught up to where we have and surpassed in other areas is extraordinary and not acknowledged enough. But it's important for me and the work that I do to bring that to the forefront, so that whatever is coming out of your mouth next, you understand where I'm coming from. You understand that lived experience, and that it's respected. I don't know if that answered your question, but those are my feelings.
Thank you for that. I often try to internalize that joy should be all of our kind of form of protest, and sometimes we get so caught up in kind of the pride of the work, how folks are perhaps disproportionately trying to undermine or grappling with how we're viewed in ways perhaps we don't agree with, that we lose sight of that. And so thank you, Tiffany, for underscoring that. And with that, Jody, I'll give you the same opportunity.
I don't know how you could follow after Tiffany's explanation, but I'll certainly try. When I think about Juneteenth, I think about the word bittersweet, right? Bitter because of all the years of enslavement, all of the unimaginable things that people had to experience. And then I think about the day, or actually I get a little bit mad about how long it took to get to that day in Galveston, Texas, for folks to actually be free. And I think about the endless opportunities that come with that. So bitter and then endless opportunities equals the sweet part of it. And so with that, I think about myself and my family, although we're not American born, they migrated from Jamaica to the United States for a better opportunity. And I think about, we're standing on the shoulders of all of those folks that actually put in all of those sacrifices to get us here. When I think about the work that I'm doing, I'll just say this, and I shared this yesterday at the USP3 conference in New York, which was pretty much filled with actually a lot of white men, not even a lot of women. And I said, hey, before I tell you about my actual role, let me give you a little synopsis about myself. I'm an immigrant that came here from a tiny little island called Jamaica. And my first device was actually in college. I used all of the libraries to have those critical resources that were needed in order to be a successful student. So I fully understand, although I feel that I'm extremely privileged right now, I understand the folks that don't have that sort of access. And so I bring that in with me everywhere that I go. I proudly come in and I'm authentically me. I understand my privileges, but I also understand the humble beginnings from where I came from. And I also understand what people are actually facing right now. And so I walk into a room, and I come from a very strict business background. So I don't play games, right? I know what I bring to the table. And then I also know that I have the added benefit of being a Black woman, a woman of color, a woman of a diverse background. So I'm able to tap into, I have that sixth sense to understand what people's needs are and how to connect them and give them the access that they want. So I have to remind myself, because sometimes I do forget those privileges, that is my sort of like portfolio of myself. And so when I come into the room and I'm talking about internet, it doesn't matter if I don't know what fiber is or what broadband speeds are that are accessible. What I do know is that there are lots of folks that are out there that actually need this, and I'm going to be that constant advocate for it every single day when I walk up into the room. So with that, that's my perspective, and I'm just going to keep up with it.
No, thank you both for that candor. And what I think is so important about today's forum is that obviously we're very intentional about who we brought together. We wanted folks to both inform the cause, but also reflect the cause and speak to, with intentionality, authentic experiences. That said, it's with great pride that I can say that you don't need to call a Juneteenth forum to bring these minds together to shape and impact what's going on in New York State. If you want to get something done in the Adirondacks, you got to talk to Tiffany. That you've got to talk to Tiffany. If you want to talk about NTIA in any corner of the state, you got to talk to Jodia. And I could say the same about Commissioner Knight, the same about Senator Kevin Parker, the same about Assemblywoman Alicia Heineman, that it's really a testament to where this country has come and the work that still needs to be done, that some of the most significant leaders in a state like New York can look and represent the very lived experience of the skin that we all enjoy. And so with that, I do want to thank you both, and I'm going to thank everyone who joined today's forum to highlight the imports of Juneteenth, to understand the history, but also underscoring that the work continues. The work continues. And what an inspiring iteration, not just manifested through today's forum, but to know that the work can continue with two amazing leaders such as yourselves. So Jodia and Tiffany, thank you so much. And with that, I do want to thank everyone for joining today on behalf of Charter Communications and Spectrum. Thank you so much for joining. And with that, I'll hand it back over to John Lentz with City and State to give us our final words.
Great, thank you. And I'd also like to thank all of our speakers today for a very timely, engaging, and informative discussion. Thanks again to our partner, Charter Communications, and especially to Camille Joseph Goldman for facilitating the forum today. Thank you also to our audience for tuning in. This concludes today's event.